The Chinese Communist Party wants to pull the United States into 4 wars. I've been talking about this for a long time. I said long before this happened it was going to happen. It was stated by Jin Canrong, one of Xi Jinping's main advisors, that one of these had to be a terrorist war. Remember, he said, basically the thinking on the United States is this. The U.S. military is designed in such a way to fight 2 wars and win 2 wars simultaneously. We have a war, of course, on our western coast and a war on the eastern coast. And the idea of the United States is because geographically we're a very big country, we have to have the ability to defend and fight on both fronts while still having, within the United States also fighting forces. The National Guard would probably play a big part in that. But by the Chinese Communist Party has understood that if you were going to defeat the United States, it has to be involved in more than 2 wars. It can't just be China and Russia, it has to be more. And so what was Jin Canrong saying? Jin Canrong was saying that, well, it could be Russia, it could be China, because the CCP is planning this. But they said that they would have to get the U.S. involved in at least 2 other wars. One of these had to be a terrorist war. Now, what happened at the very start of this conflict, if you might remember? Hamas launches a terror attack on Israel, carries out random acts of violence, kidnaps Israelis. Then what do? They flee back into Gaza with Israeli hostages. Now, based on just known responses, Hamas would understand that Israel would respond by trying to get the hostages back, right? That is basic modus operandi. They would know how Israel would react to that. Meaning, in my opinion, that they did it on purpose. They wanted Israel to invade. I believe the intention was to lure Israel into invading Gaza, or else why would they have done that? Then countries like Iran, what did they do? They used that invasion for global propaganda. And that propaganda is used to incite a global resurgence of terrorism, just like the CCP wanted. And remember as well, the Chinese Communist Party met with leaders of the Palestinian Authority right before the Hamas attack took place. Right before, folks. The attack took place 1 month after Joe Biden freed up Iran's money, and Iran has been backing the terror networks that have suddenly become active yet again, notably right after Biden freed up their money. That was the whole nature of the Israeli strike that killed the Iranian military leaders in the embassy in Syria, by the way. Iranian leadership acting as operatives to direct its terrorist networks in the region. Now look, a big plot to revive global terrorism, in my opinion, was in place. At the very least, that is how it played out. And on the other side of this, the open border policies of the Biden administration has also opened the United States and other countries, even Europe, for example, Western Europe, it has opened the door to them for terror networks run by Iran within our own borders, like Hezbollah, for example, an Iran-backed terrorist network. And remember, Hezbollah, an Iran-backed terror network, has deep ties with the Mexican cartels and also has deep ties with governments and criminal organizations throughout Latin America. In fact, they even have Hezbollah political parties in different parts of Latin America. Iran has huge influence within the narco-terrorist drug trade. Now look, on the global agenda side, the Chinese Communist Party wanted the United States again involved in a terrorist war. The CCP also wanted the United States in a war with Brazil. That was Jin Canrong. Jin Canrong was recommending a war in South America. He wanted Brazil to do that. That got thrown into the wayside because Bolsonaro came into office and he threw a giant wrench into that plot. And who was the leader at the time when the CCP wanted a war, a regional war in Latin America? That was Lula da Silva, who is now back into office, by the way, because the Brazilian Supreme Court made it so that he could run yet again, even though he was in prison. They let him out and let him run for office again. Lula, the guy the CCP wanted to start a war, is back in office in Brazil. And it's possible that that agenda from the CCP is now back on the plate. And remember what's happening in Latin America right now. Venezuela is looking to invade Guyana for its oil reserves. Guyana, at the northern tip of South America, right next to Colombia and to the north of Brazil, or right around that region, right? It's on the northern tip. Guyana recently found one of the world's largest oil reserves. They are in place to become like the new Saudis. And what happened? The CCP got the contracts to do oil exploration. That money, that oil, is Chinese Communist Party property. Of course, in Guyana, and well, what's happening now? The CCP seems to want others who are more in its favor to take that over. Venezuela, under Maduro, who recently won re-election, is now talking about invading Guyana because they say it is historically owned property. They say, we have historical ownership over this region and we must retake it. That sounds familiar because that's the excuse that Russia is using against Ukraine. It's also the excuse the Chinese Communist Party is using against places like Taiwan and the entire South China Sea. Now, it's possible we could see that type of war, and very likely if Venezuela invades Guyana, you will see Brazil, with Lula in charge, backing Venezuela in that operation. Meaning, frankly, this is exactly what Xi Jinping's main advisor wanted to happen. Everything is falling into place. It is happening exactly as they said it would. All of these things align perfectly with the strategy of the Chinese Communist Party. And then, of course, there's the weaponized migration system. The basically weaponized migration is a concept of how you destabilize countries using mass migration. The system has been used by many countries around the world, exposed and in open strategy, right? There's talk, for example, that Venezuela has had a large hand in starting the mass illegal immigration towards the United States. But of course, the U.S. under Biden shares just as much blame for this because Biden brought us into the Global Compact for Migration, a United Nations agreement that openly facilitates this, using American taxpayer dollars to pay for direct flights into the United States and so on, suggesting there are officials within the United States involved in this entire plot. That system is destabilizing the United States. That system is bankrupting American cities. It's allowing for normalized criminality, also with these Soros-backed DAs and so on, destroying law and order in the United States. They're also opening the doors to terrorist networks like Hezbollah, and they're keeping us busy dealing with this internal crisis. In other words, it is all falling into place. This is exactly what the CCP wanted. This is exactly what the United States' enemies have been talking about. And frankly, I would wonder if there are enemies within our own borders who help plot this. Maybe the people involved with creating this mass illegal migration process, maybe the people involved with masterminding the Iranian deals, maybe the people involved with the Chinese Communist Party and lobbying on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party and pushing the CCP's interests within the borders of the United States. I would wonder if we have traitors in our midst who have enacted policies doing these things in line with these international agreements, which are aimed to, of course, destabilize the United States and allow for a multipolar world order under a Chinese communist model.